Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back to the Sundance Kabuki, Francis Coppola.
I have a bar stool here. Where's the bar?
Well, actually, it's right here.
Okay.
By some kind of happenstance, we have some wines here from Coppola Winery. What do we have here? We have Cinema. That's a nice wine. And I understand this is the latest one, Eleanor?
That's a recent...
That's recent. And here's Director's Cut Zinfandel. And I must say that the Sundance Kabuki has been carrying Director's Cut for probably, about 3 or 4 years. And it's available at the bar. So anyway, I just want to start this out. I was saying that this is sort of more of a new chapter. Mr. Coppola, if you had to title the new chapter, what would you call it?
I think back to the beginning. In a way, I always used to hear that when a man reaches a certain age, he shaves off his head and gives away his possessions and goes out with a begging bowl, and that idea appealed to me. And to do that in a metaphorical sense, I sort of wanted to annihilate myself. I wanted to. I always to destroy myself and then come back step by step and learn it all over again. And I think of that great scene, and I know which of the Kurosawa films, I'm sure someone here can help me, whether it was Sanjuro or Yojimbo, where he's beaten down and he is more dead than alive, and he's in a box and he can barely move, and he starts to throw his knife to see if he can pierce a leaf that's going by. Which one is that? Is it Sanjuro? I'm not sure. That's Yojimbo. It's Yojimbo, thank you. I knew I would find the answer, and little by little get his confidence back that he can nail the leaf. And then, of course, so in a way, my career was so bizarre to start out as a young person in San Francisco with the desire to make personal films, original screenplays. And I'll talk more about the original screenplay notion, because there's more to it than it sounds, but original screenplays, and then because of The Godfather, everything went crazy, and I had much more opportunity and possibility than I ever thought I would, and as a result, I used it, of course, to the maximum, and found myself in bankruptcy and buying Hollywood studios and doing all these wacky things that I would never have even attempted had not I had that enormous success from The Godfather. And I wanted to go back to where I had been with the Rain People or with The Conversation, to write an original script, to make films inexpensively without all of the tremendous benefits of very high-paid collaborators, which are doing so much of the work and that do indeed make the film more exceptional if you can afford them. My original screenplay, when a film is adapted from a novel or a play, certainly a successful novel or a play, the first writer who wrote that did the heavy lifting. And then even they proved that the audience was attracted to that subject matter because, the novel had been a bestseller. That shows that it already was a marketing winner. But to not have the benefit of that was what I wanted, because I wanted more than anything as a young person, and to this day, as I sit before you, I want to be a writer and to be able to write original material without the heavy lifting. So these 3 films got me back in the box, throwing the knife at the leaf without the great Vittorio Storaro or Gordon Willis or Dean Pavelaris or all those extraordinary, Milena Canonero, all those extraordinary collaborators, because one of the most expensive things on a movie, any movie, but a little movie especially, are the plane tickets and the per diems and the hotel bills. So if you go to somewhere alone, there are no plane tickets, there are no hotel bills, there are no per diems, because all the people, please shut off your cell phone. No, just a joke. because the people live there. They just go home at night. You don't have to put them in a hotel. So now I think I've made 3 films, and 3 films I have to say that I like. I know, many people have put those films down or are not too impressed. That's okay. I'm used to that. When the Conversation wasn't a big success, so it got some awards, but it never made any money. Rumblefish, Apocalypse Now was on the verge of, I'll tell you, when we showed the Japanese distributor who had put up money for Apocalypse Now, we showed Apocalypse to them, and the version that we showed, as we did to all distributors, was really what later became known as Apocalypse Redux. It was longer by about 30 minutes. And I can't tell you the expression on the faces of these people who put up money for a movie that was supposed to be like a Vietnam bridge on the river, Guns of Navarone. They thought it was going to be like a war film, and instead it was this strange, surreal thing. And I remember coming back on Pacific Avenue, where I used to own a building, which I lost in the subsequent aftermath, and all the editors and people, the team, were looking at me. And I looked at them and I said, or rather I sang, I said, a good screenplay we haven't got, a good director we haven't got, a good movie we haven't got. What have we got? Bum, bum. We've got hard miles and miles and miles of... And, they all started singing it, and we went back and we cut out 25 minutes, which then is why there is the long version and the short version. And we gave it to the distributors and went like this, and it looked, I remember reading Frank Rich in the New York Times saying that this film was the biggest disaster in Hollywood history. And I said, gee, was that one worse? I mean, did I really make the biggest disaster? It was interesting. Why is it the worst film? I was so depressed. And I can think of so many movies in those days which now they say, wow, he made The Godfather and The Conversation and Godfather 2 and Apocalypse Now, all 1, 2, 3, 4 in 4.5 years. But it didn't feel like that then. I just felt maligned, and I felt like whole Baltimore, I just felt like I was in the bookstore and nobody liked my stuff. So I'm used to that feeling, and I feel it now. But I don't care, because who knows anyway? Who knows what... Those films now have been all revised, and the people talk about them as though they were something, but in those days they didn't. Even the review for the first Godfather was so depressing. I remember the first one I saw in Variety. You can get it and put it down, so success and those opinions in the day are so unreliable. You don't know, so you can only just keep going forward to accomplish whatever it is you had in mind, and do your best. And who knows, the good thing about my films is that 30, 40 years later, people are still paying to see them. So it's like owning an apartment building that's been rented all these years. In a funny way.
And you paid for it already.
So in answer to your question, I feel I've made these 3 freshman films, and now I'm at work writing a really ambitious personal film, original screenplay, but not some little thing for fun, or like Tetro, which was a little inquiry of what was my family like, sort of. But this one is ambitious. It will probably take me the rest of the year. It'll be a big film, sort of an epic of a sort. I hope I can pull it off, achieve it. It would be heartbreaking. One element of it is a heartbreaking love story. There's a lot about it that's personal. It is not in any way autobiographical. But of course, you read novelists who say everything you write when you're writing literature is autobiographical. What else can you do but write what you know? So that's what I'm doing now. And, I have no idea. It's set and starts in the 20s and is partly in the 30s and goes into the 50s and early 60s, and it would probably, when you think of what these kinds of films cost today, cost a lot, but I sort of have an imaginary airbox full of imaginary money, and when the time comes for me, if I ever do feel I've licked the script, then I'll reach into that box and I'll pull out my own money and I'll make it. So now I'd love to have your questions, your vote of hatred for what you saw, that you had a few laughs and you found it interesting.
Speak loudly.
Speak loudly.
I really enjoyed these last few films. The first time I've seen this film tonight, and I really enjoyed Petro and Youth Got Youth. And I noticed in this film, this hopefully is not too personal of a question to ask, but the scene with the boating accident I thought was really powerful, and it kind of took me a bit out of the film because it seemed like such a personal thing to put in there. A main part of the writing process.
I don't know if you could hear him, but he said he was struck by the moment when Poe is leading Hall over the cliff and there's the raging, scary, and Hall doesn't want to go on, and Poe says, are you sure you want to go on because you can't come back? And he was sort of saying it to me because I didn't want to go into that. I hadn't looked at the aspect of what had happened to me quite in the way that I was going to try to look at it. And, there is the idea that when you're going to write, as Poe wrote about his wife and what have you, you're entering this that you can't retreat from later on. It's done. And I felt at that moment as an artist, I had to put my money where my mouth was. That's what he said, can you go on? And I said, I can go on. And what I had never looked on before was that regarding that accident, he had asked me to go with him. And I never admitted to anyone or to myself. I thought he was talking about little boats, kids' boats. I had no idea that they were speedboats. And so I didn't go. And, I always felt I should have been there because had I been there, who knows? So at that moment, I just took the dare. And I said, if Poe could write about the loss of... I read a poem somewhere is that, he said something, I wish I knew the words because there's so more people than I could write, but he says, she is buried below and I must be here and cry alone, that he wrote for his wife. And, that's what it is. When you're going to reach into that stuff, you can't step back from it. It's there, and I didn't know how sort of not guilty. It's not guilt, obviously. If I had gone, maybe I couldn't have prevented it, but I had never seen it that way, that I should have been there. And I used this film I thought this film was a comedy. I was laughing and goofing off. Val Kilmer's a wacky guy, and we were just having fun the whole time. But at this moment, I took the step, and it was scary. I was a big cliff down there.
With the glasses, yeah. That's you. You have glasses on. Yeah.
I'm curious, when you work with a composer like Stuart Copeland, how much of a collaboration is it in terms of, because I feel like the score and the sound in films is sometimes such a strong element, and it really drives a lot of what various scenes feel like. So how much of a collaboration is that, and how much is it more direction?
Well, you work with the key collaborators. You have the photographer, of course. We have the art direction, the production designer, the music, the costumes. All those people are your prime generals, if it were an army, and it's a very collaborative situation. In the case of what you bring up of Rumpelfish, I had always wanted to write the music myself, and I did some experiments with a lot of time-like percussion, because it was about time in so many ways, and I myself took the bass and I did this bass line, and I originally engaged Stuart Copeland, who calls himself a rhythmatist because he's such an incredible, in the Police and what have you, hear those fabulous, intricate rhythms. And he got so into it that he said, can I write the score? And I believe that he had the ability. I just hired him as the drummer, as the rhythmist, and I said yes, and you can, and he did a wonderful job. But it was, and he was based on the ideas that we had developed with my son Roman doing the and me doing the bass, and you hear those same instruments in the score because he had those little experiments. And this composer, Osvaldo Hulhoff, in this picture, he collaborated with Dan Deacon, who's an animal of a different sort, and it's because I was looking for something that ultimately could be performed. I had always intended to take this movie on tour, and we had developed a software. Movies today are digital files and shown on digital projectors, rented digital projectors, and therefore the filmmaker could really, like the next show tonight, if I were here and I had my little, and I could edit it differently, and if I sat there with you and I saw that you didn't laugh or you liked the part, I could do more of that or do less of something you didn't like. And the way opera was 200 years ago, that's where the encore came from. So that's one of the reasons I worked with Dan Deacon, because he performs live, and that was my intention. And I said, if I take this on a tour and do it live, I'm going to have to pay for it. And the hell with people, I don't want to pay for it. Sooner or later they'll realize I was right, that films are going to be performed live as theater is. But let them just figure that out for themselves, because I have another script to write, which I'm working on. I can't just do everything and pay for it, too. So maybe. Young lady. Yes, young lady.
I'll try to speak loud. I have a question.
I'll repeat it if you...
One is, when you mentioned the Apocalypse Now, which I thought was...
disagreed with Frank Rich.
I'm wondering if the question is whether the Deer Hunter came out about the same time. And the Deer Hunter was very pro-Vietnam War and had a very positive role about the U.S., or a very positive argument about the U.S. role. Your film was a lot more critical, and I'm wondering, do you think that maybe that has something to do with how it's distributed? My comment has to do with...
Yeah, she talked about the Deer Hunter. Deer Hunter came out first, but I started first. It's just that I took longer. And I was, it was a real crucible that I was in, because not only was I embarking on a movie that was supposed to be like The Guns of Navarone, but was becoming more and more surreal as we were making it, because the Vietnam War wasn't World War II, and it had its own vibe. It was, for one thing, the first California war film, because all these movies were like New York war films. There was a guy from Brooklyn, and the characters were all Southern California, beautiful blonde boys who were surfers, and there were drugs involved, and so it was a different kind of movie. And so I was not that old, but I was in a spot. I was financing it, and I didn't really have the money. I just put up my home in Napa, everything I had. And in those days, bank interest, you can't believe how much it cost. My bank interest was at record heights. I remember at one point it was almost 70%. Maybe I'm wrong, it was just my hallucination. So, I was in a financial fear of losing everything. What had I done? And then I also was creatively said, can I pull this off? Can I come up with, can I go? Even Brando was so funny. He looked at me, he was so bright, Brando. He says, you painted yourself in a corner. Because he realized that as I made the movie, I was making it more and more surrealistic. So when I got to the end, just a big battle scene with the North Vietnamese regulars wasn't going to get me out of it. I had to get out of it philosophically, and I didn't know how to do that. So, it took me a long time to pull myself together and really edit the film. Meanwhile, The Deer Hunter came out. I don't know that. I feel, whenever a person is on a run and you have a success with The Godfather and critically with the conversation, and a big success with Godfather 2, which was the first time a sequel had, come to the level of the first one, and then Apocalypse Now, they were gunning for me. They don't like, they like to knock the person on the run down, and then when I finished that and got away with it in whole and didn't lose everything, then One from the Heart was like in ping pong when you give them the ball. They just One from the Heart was just this sweet kind of, artificial fantasy that was easy to spike. And then, but yes, I don't think that the critics punished me for. Because it had slightly more critical. It really wasn't critical. It more that the film wasn't about the war. It was about this concept of modern morality. There was a line in the film that really said to me the theme. John Milius line. He says, "We teach the boys to drop fire on people, but we won't let them write the word fuck on their airplanes." I said that was this crazy morality that was going on. I don't like to think that I think I was punished for just flying too close to the sun.
This gentleman with the
Yeah,
white hair.
I really liked the One from the Heart back then, but I was in a theater not too far from here, and it was just a small room. This last day, it was his favorite theater, and everybody applauded. The few that saw this, and then I heard Siskel and Ebert. They took it through. They rated it result, and then about 6 months later, Siskel comes back on the air and he goes, I think I was wrong. That was a visual movie. I didn't understand that. What you think maybe you're maybe ahead of the critics? You're not that bright?
I don't know. I mean, art, if I can speak so pompously, I would love to be a practitioner of art, but art in general is always a little ahead of the times. You think of the Belle Epoque, and what a beautiful time we all enjoyed in Woody Allen's film when he's trying to go back to such a wonderful time. Those artists that we love, Degas and Monet and Manet and the beautiful lady, what was her name, who was there, the wife of Manet's brother, and they were all impoverished. They couldn't get arrested by the critics. They couldn't be included in the formal exhibitions. Yet those are the paintings you want to own now, not the ones that were the hits. So I mean, there is a function of you're just a little ahead because an artist is working with his heart, or should be, and that takes you to see things just a little differently, and then the public eventually. In fact, the reason that I took Apocalypse Now and released it in the old version that we had shown to the Japanese is I was 20 years later, I was in England in a little Haslitt's hotel, a little teeny hotel in Soho, and I was watching this little television, and the beginning of Apocalypse came on. This is the end, and I always liked the beginning, and I watched it, and I ended up watching the whole picture, which is not something I do. And I thought, gee, that film isn't so far out. That film is just, I'm going to go put those 25 minutes back in it. It wasn't as crazy as I thought because the times had caught up with it. Like the art of yesterday, the avant-garde of yesterday is what you buy for wallpaper tomorrow. So there isn't. And you look back at movies that even, some of the movies, the great movies are good in any time. I mean, the best years of our lives is beautiful, no matter when you see it, beautiful. But you look at movies, I remember that my parents saw, that was a great movie, like Snake Pit or something. And you go back and you look at it, and they look so old-fashioned compared, because the culture is always moving, it's always changing, and it's always incorporating all of this work that was done by these people who weren't successful in their time. You look at the writer Robert Bolaño, I guess he was Chilean, but if you know his work, I mean, he died at 56 penniless. Now he's the new darling of the this fantastic run of great South American writers, and he never knew what was to come. I mean, maybe he did, but he didn't see it.
We actually have time for one more question. we got a whole bunch of people out here.
The guy who helped me with the leaves, but first the young lady behind him, because.
Thank you for being here and sharing information. It's wonderful. My question is, in the process of scaling back to what you want to do, I'm curious,
Well, by having no budget, you know, filmmaking is making 1,000 decisions a day, and many of them are problem-solving decisions. To solve a problem, except dream up a way to do it that costs nothing, and you know, just depend on your wits and try to just learn how to, you know, as Napoleon says, use the weapons at hand. And did you guys laugh at all tonight? I'm going to see the picture now. We're going to show it again. I want to see it because I always get a kick out of it. I think it's funny when it's being funny, and it's not so funny when you talked about it. Yeah. Young man, yes.
If you're all right, I'd like to ask 2 questions. The first one is on your crowning achievement, Apocalypse Now. I'd like to know if that film was inspired at all by Herzog's masterpiece, Aguirre, Wrath of God. I know there's a lot of similarities between the two.
Aguirre, certainly. I think it was inspired certainly by the writing of John Milius, who wrote the first script. It was inspired. I was very impressed with Aguirre, The Wrath of God, and I was also very inspired by a documentary I saw by Eugene Jones called The Face of War. You know, art is a matter of like taking in all the things that get you excited, be it the work of artists who came before you, and they want you to take it. They want you to, in a way, steal from them. Just as I want young people to steal from me if there's anything worth stealing, because it sort of makes you immortal if you take an idea you saw. I'm sure Herzog is pleased that I like Aguirre so much, but then he wanted to outdo me, and so he made Fitzcarraldo after this. So, you know, he's like that. Yes, you're quite right.
My other question was, building off on the last one, what artists do you think you have taken from have had an effect on your work?
Well, the greatest actor, writer, director of actors is Elia Kazan. And I was always very just astonished with the beautiful performances that he's able to put into his films. And I would love to do films that are moving. I have a dream of doing a movie that's really heart-wrenchingly moving, and I don't feel I've done that yet, and so that's what keeps me youthful. Keep trying. And certainly can. I mean, the great silent directors, Murnau and Pabst, are great inspirations. They had a lot to do. That whole German period in the 20s had a lot to do with cinema came after, especially in Hitchcock. As you know, Hitchcock was a 20-year-old, was sent to Germany and just wandered around Ufa in awe of what was going on. William Wyler was an interesting director. I think he just was born with the knack and talent of how to do it. I see nothing in his background of how he got it, but I saw some films he made that were just so beautiful. King Vidor, Billy Wilder, The Apartment. It's interesting that the cinema's only been around for 100 years, but there's so many masterpieces. It's almost as though the human race was waiting to make movies. It just didn't have the cameras and the technology, but when it got them, it just went crazy and just made all these. I mean, you can name 100 masterpieces especially if you include the silent movies. So how did all that come? And imagine had they just figured out the gears and the equipment 200 years before. Think of the movies Goethe and Schiller and those people would have made. But movies, the cinema is truly magical. That's why I was resentful of the 3D sentiment a year ago when, the new future of movies is 3D. Is that the future of movies is 3D? What are you talking about? The future of movies, say, in the innovative ways the writing is going to be done, and the form, and even the fact that it can be performed live. I mean, I'd give anything to see the movies that your grandchildren are going to make, because I think we would open our eyes and wonder at how different they will be.
Well, it's wonderful. Thank you so much. We really want to thank you for being here. So I'm just going to think of a seat number who D3. Who's sitting in D3? Because we want to give you a nice bottle of director's cut wine. That would be you. So
And that
come
was
and
hard
get
to
a
figure
bottle.
out. That was a real
Come on.
go-into script that we had to figure out how to wind around.